Yeah. So debating on the motion, this House believes that faith-based organizations should actively adopt the provision of social services as the primary mode of evangelization. Calling on Prime Minister to start a debate. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Okay. Hi, I'm Adi. PY prefer. My pronouns are he, him. PY preference. Through voice on the next word. Oh, is it alright as well if I record my speech? That'd be fine with everyone. I would suppose so. There's a reason why. There's a reason why the Bible itself says, love thy neighbors. Why every other religion in this planet says that you must love people, must love your companions and everyone else. So, for the purpose of this debate, we believe that faith-based organizations are those that are preaching basically the gospel, those that are related to religions, those that are related acquainted with, for example, the Catholic Church, with Christianity, with the Islamic religion, with amongst many other religions and denominations, and that they must actively adopt the provision of social services, such as, for example, food packs, especially to the underprivileged communities, financial aids, scholarships, and other means of promoting social services as their primary mode of evangelization, i.e., the act of preaching, sharing, living out the gospel, or whatever scriptures the religious denomination follows. So, for the purpose of this debate, I'd just like to clarify that, first of all, society has become less religious at this point. Because of how advanced in terms of technology we have been. There's especially amongst families before would usually always go to church, for example, whichever their religious denomination is. But now you could easily go to church online, or some people that wouldn't even do that. And also because of the other social activities that people now have subscribed to. Now, note that this debate will tackle how social change is very much transformative and important to this debate, and how how society would benefit much from having faith-based organizations that provide social services, and who were able to provide hope to the people, especially the underprivileged communities, more than whatever social movements could. More so, we tell you that people have become more disillusioned with religion these days, because somehow people think that religion does not exactly act what they preach. Like when they tell us that when they tell you that you must love thy neighbor, sometimes it just seems like the highest priests or pastors in the religious sector, like speaking from a lectern, and not speaking like to the speaking with the people. Like it just seems like so disconnected. There's a disconnect between religion, especially with the highest levels of that congregation, with the people, especially the underprivileged. But every religion has vowed to love thy neighbor, to love people, especially to be generous with them. And so we also make this framing that religion has become a divisive issue. But through social services, you will be able to um um you'll be able to mend these connections back. And obviously, through these faith-based organizations actively adopting the provision of social services, they're able to have capacity building for affecting change. Again, religion is a big part of society. It influences a lot of people's beliefs, a lot of people's attitudes and personalities. And so, in so far as society is concerned, it should also it should also be included in terms of the social issues that we have. And so religions being able to, like, for example, collect tithes, or collect many of, like, basically they're able to fundraise, then they have the capacity. But they're gonna even have more capacity because they will be able to collaborate with non-government and government or organizations. And more so, religions will be able to be grounded, and awareness will be raised, and especially in social issues, because again, these are religions. They have that level of influence, especially during their
POI.
lectures, when they go down. But before that, yes, POI.
Your social services only turned as a form of evangelization, so you still co-opt the elements when evangelizing. What's the margin?
No, okay, I'll be explaining that later, but now allow me to go with my first argument. The first argument is basically on the empowerment of average religious to be socially active. How does this happen? So note that now, the very religious people are usually insulated within their religion. They're usually just there, and for example, if they do give money, or if they do give donations, they just give donations. But what we wish to have is that if through faith-based organizations that are actively, going out in far-flung communities, distributing social services like goods and like scholarships, being much more aware of social issues and how they could aid in those social issues, then you're able to then you're able to open the eyes and like influence those within your religious congregation to be much more involved, to not only give donations but to even go to your drives, for example, to be much more involved in society. And that means then that it now becomes more of a call to action, but there's not like a response to that action. And this is very much relevant because again, religions are centered on loving people, loving your neighbor. And so another aspect that we would like to further on this is how you would be able to encourage the youth. This actually becomes an impact and X our second argument. How does this happen? Because when you encourage the youth, how do you encourage the youth here? Because it happens through, notice how the youth right now, they're now more socially active, but they're not as active in terms of religion. At least when you look at it from a general view, older people are much more active in terms of religion. But because social issues involve everyone, including the youth, then if faith-based organizations that spread the gospel, that help in the evangelization, then for example during drives, during, like, for example, visits to far-flung communities, the youth could be included. Notice how so many how much notice how youth camps are very much prevalent in this time, because that those are ways to evangelize the youth through ways that are much more socially active and relevant to them, that through ways that would actually attract them. And so when you encourage the youth, you're able to have a bigger congregation, which is good for the faith-based organizations. And you're also able to be to extract um change, to be able to extract movement from people, to be able to effect change, because you have more people now, so change needs people, obviously, and you need the manpower. And obviously, with there being so many people moving around, so many people trying to put forth and provide social services, then you're able to effect more change, especially for the underprivileged, for the marginalized, because obviously there are people that the government couldn't simply reach. And so through faith-based organizations, which have the primary incentive to reach out to those in the peripheries, to reach out the far-flung areas, especially the poorest of the poor and the last, the least, and the lost, then you're able to uplift those people, so that's already like a net benefit that you get from us. And moreover, you're able to also remove the elitist connotation that comes that is associated with the highest leaders of the congregations. And you're also able to have effective evangelization, because obviously when you're giving religious goods, or like when you're giving relief goods, when you're giving social services, you're able to attract people, and you're able to do so and also spread the word of God, or like the scriptures of your religious congregation. And my deputy prime minister will further the case of government. For all these reasons, propose. Oh my gosh.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Just a reminder that anything beyond 7:15 will no longer be credited. If you reach 7:30, I'll verbally cut you off. Calling on Alo. You're here.
Hi everyone, name's Snails. Pronoun she, her, POI, anytime. Let me just set my timer real quick. Where is it? Okay. Okay, POI said like it to be raised through voice. Anytime. I think that's up for the setup. I think I'll be wait lang. For the last time, I'd like to clarify if I'm audible.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. You may start.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll be starting in 3, 2, 1. I'd like to first start off with clarifications because I think that government misses a lot of context. Number one, faith-based organization is not inherently made to do services or for the poor. Yes, it is part of the, for example, people's obligation to do good deeds, but that is not the major agendas for this type of organization. What I mean to say is that I want government to prove that what is the necessity of this organization to do, for example, this social services when there are already non-government organizations that likely do so. What I want to say here is that it's true that historically the people were able to, for example, learn how to share and help the poor towards their religious beliefs, but that ought to be something that people ought to do because they have, for example, obligations, or they want to, for example, increase, for example, the connection with their belief. The problem that I want to posit here is that this faith-based organization, the moment that you subscribe as what the gov, it will look like in the long run, there's an overall like premium towards adopting social services, which means to say that the faith-based organization's goal is going to be diluted in the first place. But let me first discuss as to what is actually currently in the status quo and what is the main goals of this faith-based organization. Because it's not entirely, for example, an act or emotion. It's not entirely limited, for example, to what you want to do, but it's also limited or contingent towards what is the context of this faith-based organization. These organizations are initiatives driven to understand and preach, for example, the teachings to strengthen their connection towards God, to gain subscribers that are genuine, to learn about their beliefs and core principles, not entirely, for example, preach towards any act, right? But it's true that these, for example, acts do help this faith-based organization, but the nuance here is on how does then the government applies on actively adopting it as a primary mode, meaning to say that there's more premium in doing more social acts than actually rather helping or educating these people towards their subscribers. This is where we get, for example, a lot of people confused if they're good or bad because it's limited towards, for example, the actions that you just do charity, but you do not understand what's the purpose of charity, right? Here are what I want to say. The faith-based organizations have a goal in mind, which means to say that this is a platform for people to do good, for people to preach the gospels towards understanding and educating people. This means to say that we want genuine followers who are educated to understand the practices of what their messengers or prophets, for example, preach, which means to say that here comes the discussion of evangelization or preaching gospel towards a deeper level, not just to gain subscribers, not just, for example, for example, look good for the masses, but to actually do it for the good and for actually, for example, for people to internalize it, and it's a platform for people to be able to understand their beliefs. Because what does it mean when these institutions actively adopt? It means to say that there's an integration of social services when you're doing, for example, like preaching, which means to say that social services are acts on aids or feeding programs or humanitarian aids or yada yada. But the problem here is that the evangelization loses its essence towards to be able to discuss on a deeper level and maintain the connection and maintain the genuine understanding between its followers, and it's
TY.
also main goal of its, for example, organization. The point of evangelization is to preach, meaning to say that you have to spread the gospel towards learning, towards actually like integrating the principle or core beliefs to understand, for example, what is behind, for example, those verses or Bibles or Qurans, right? The goal is not just who does more good, but who gets to preach towards the goals as what the gospel intended to do so in the first place.
TY.
There are other alternatives other than social services to preach. Counterfactual is to remain on missionary, peer counseling, education based or community based, for example, like preaching of evangelization, because number one, it looks like the seminar based event that these organizations conduct for people of the followers to understand. It looks like, for example, people who are, for example, like telling for establishing, for example, organizations to teach, for example, people to read Quran, or for example, to for people to understand the Bibles more towards, for
TY.
example, collaborative measures. Let's go take your PY.
So the unique benefit of faith-based orgs under our comparative is that you give social welfare. You unite both people who are old and liberal. Usually they do not agree. This implicates that capacity to actually help people is greater on our comparative in contrast to the NGOs on your side.
I need to first need the government to prove why social welfare is something of a more priority, for example, like goal of this organization, considering that it's faith-based, meaning to say that it's more, for example, to leaning towards how you spread, for example, the messages rather than, for example, social welfare, because the point here that I want to posit here is that social welfare is ought to be done out of what we understand, for example, towards what is preached. Meaning to say that here's our first argument. Faithful and spiritual acts becomes limited or surface level towards surface level faith towards understanding each and everyone's faith. The shifting becomes from focusing on understanding and educating belief, or in the long run, what happens in government is that the message becomes simplified. Do good, share your blessing. That's an act of worship. Yes, we do concede that there's nothing wrong with that. But the problem is when these faith-based organization actively adopts social services, it becomes oversaturated towards how they're going to preach, for example, preach their gospel, meaning to say that it actively puts more premium and focus on that aspect. Why is that something that we want to say that's problematic in the long run? It leaves out certain context of what it means to be faithful. I do charity, I'm a good person. That's it. That's the message that it sends for the people. So if there's no, for example, underlying connection towards their belief, it leaves out other factors towards understanding faith, such as intention, discipline, character resiliency, or trust, or what it means to be, for example, to repent. Here comes the rise of performative religious acts just to get subscribers, or just to get, for example, money. This becomes exploitative in nature because you exploit, for example, things that are do good when they're in current status quo. There are already non-government organizations that provide the avenue for the social welfare to do so. So their benefit is not entirely exclusive. But secondly, even if, for example, we want to push for social welfare, we do want that. But the problem here is that on how it's going to be adopted as a main primary mode of evangelization, right? Because here's where we discuss on levels of internalization on the gospels or principles of the religion. The purpose of the preaching is to practice through intent and understanding religion. So the internalization is limited in the God's world because it's only, for example, like surface level towards do good or give social welfare. You can still do social welfare in our house. The thing here is that it is done through an understanding, and it's not oversaturated, or like, for example, main use of spreading gospel. It's much more commitment based. It's much more better for the followers or subscribers of that beliefs, because it keeps these core principle beliefs and understanding that you do not necessarily have to do charity just to do good. But secondly, on the connection towards their belief and their gods, it allows individual level to internalize their own beliefs, and far more better, for example, own act of social welfare, because it's not exclusive on their house. Problem here lies on how actively adopting leads to the primary and how it's going to be in the long run. With all of those reasons, go.
Thank you, opposition. Um, just a reminder, anything beyond 7:15 is not going to be credited. So I advise you to just wrap up by 7:15. Yeah, don't extend until 7:30 or else I'll cut you off. Calling on TPM. Here.
Hi, panel. My name is Morgan. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, when there are millions of people who are preaching these religion stuff, but they don't actually do it. Why? The question I ask you is, why don't we make them want to serve? Why don't we make them help the community? The problem with opposition is that they don't give a specific harm, they don't give a specific benefit on their side. They just kind of say that they're superficial, but don't say anything about it. Here's what we'll be proving. The first thing, but before that, I want to talk about the context, because the main thing within this debate is about social change. And we think that this metric is the most proximate, the most urgent, and the most important. And this is the main thing that should be weighed over any other metric within this debate, and we think that we already win that from the first clash. But secondly, I want to go and start reframing. Three clarifications regarding religion. Firstly, is that we know that this is something that people rely on for faith. That this is something that they genuinely believe in, and I'll get to the implications of that later. But then secondly, on evangelization, is that we tell that it is not simply just preaching and telling people, hey, you should follow God, you should follow the Bible, but it is on getting followers through service, through acts. Read the definition by Ms. Aki Pera on the definition of evangelist. It obviously involves acts. We don't buy their argument, or don't buy their claim that evangelism is simply just talking. But then lastly, is that we tell that the goal of religion is simply not just getting followers. They say that the goal of religion is get followers. That's not true, because what faith-based organizations really want is to do what they believe that their God has told you to. In the act of Christianity, in the act of Islam, in every major religion, that act is always to help thy neighbor, to help the people around you, to create a better community, to help out society. The second thing I want to clarify then is on what does actively adopt and the primary mode of evangelization really look like. We tell you that this looks like practical and concrete actions for service. This looks like after Sunday Mass, the whole congregation goes into the local homeless shelter and volunteers for 2 hours. This looks like constantly asking for money or raising money to help local marginalized communities, like what PM
Right.
my PM has already said. We tell you that this involves concrete actions that actually help the community. I want to go into my main rebuttal under sole claim coming from PM that religion is superficial and is on fake acts, is fake, and that it's bad. They don't tell you why it's bad, but then just to debunk it. For less of rebuttal. Firstly, that it is not. We tell you that a majority of religions, it is much in line with their doctrine to help out people. They're not clout chasers. They simply want to help because that is what they believe God has told them to. But then the secondly thing is that their argument that all of it is superficial is very assuming because some people may not. And we tell you that they don't prove harm as to why we shouldn't do it, even if only 1% of all religious people actually believe in it. We tell you that even if it's only one, we might as well just do it anyway, right? But then lastly, two even ifs. Firstly, even if it was true, we train people to do it and we train people to be familiar with the acts of service so that it's not something completely abhorrent to them. But then lastly, even if it were true, that the simple act of volunteer, of bringing money, still helps people, regardless of whether or not it's actually true or whether or not they're just doing it to get followers. Because we tell you that the benefits of social action is still on our side. They don't prove anything otherwise. My last point of rebuttal is just their argument that we don't need this because we have NGOs. That's not true because, and I'll get to that in my constructive. But religions is big. Like you need that to have a support. So
POI.
my first extension. Before that, I'll take that POI.
Is it the job of these organizations?
Yes. Yes, it is. So my first my extension is how it empowers average religious people who's religious to be more socially active. Firstly, is why is it likely to work? Because as I've said, every religion preaches that faith without works is dead and that they need to serve, they need to help their neighbor. Second thing is that faith-based orders tend to be very centralized and structured insofar as if the top guy says, hey guys, we need to do more support for the local community, for the local women's shelter, then most people tend to listen to the priest, to the pastor, and say, okay, yeah, we'll listen and we'll start doing that. The third reason is that the process of actively adopting the province means we encourage people to do more acts. The four main impacts are simple. Firstly, is that we make them more socially aware, and that religious peoples often tend to be very secluded and not super aware of what's going on. We at least tell them what's going on. The second thing is that we get more support and capital. This comes from political. This comes from monetary capital. What this means is the reason why this is true is because faith-based organizations are huge. There are billions of people all around the world who will subscribe to this, and without that base of support, even if you just get 50% of that to genuinely act, that is still huge. The third thing is the practical benefit, because through more capital, you're able to do more works. You're able to help more people, raise more money. You're also able to get more socially aware policies and help the people who need it the most. And then lastly, this is uniquely beneficial to religious organizations. So that the second speakers can't talk about why religious makes people you can still replace it with NGOs. We tell that this is uniquely beneficial to religions because your religion gives you an extra material reason for service. And that they don't tell you you need to serve for clout, you need to serve so you can do a good college. They tell you you should serve because you should serve because that's what God tells you, and that is the reason why you should. That is the reason why having religions discuss this is really important. The next thing I want to add is adding on Addy's claim that it generates more social change, because we tell you that because we get more religion becomes more liberalized, because more people end up opting in because they are having that. The last thing I want to prove is on destigmatizing religions, because Addy proves that people are already getting disinterested, disillusioned by faith-based organizations. They tell that they're not actually doing this. The first thing that we want to say is that it makes people see them as not as hypocritical. A lot of the common arguments against religions, you say that you want to help everyone, but then you disregard hobos. You still go against homosexuals. We tell you that by virtue of the religion helping these communities out, people see, they're not just hypocritical, they actually do what they preach. The second thing is that there are likely collaborations with other legit organizations, like NGOs, like government organizations, that you are able to collaborate and thus bring new ideas and assistance into the religion. Thirdly is that it's easier to track and measure because it's service. The main impacts are clear. It's important because religion gives people hope. Makes people believe that their goodness and service means something through the very virtue of religion, because it makes them believe in a higher being. The second thing is that it encourages more social change because it gives them an extra material reason to serve. Fourthly, and lastly, is that even if they don't subscribe or join these religions, we get more trust on our side. What that means then is that we get more social cohesion and cooperation for social actions. This is like more liberal people during religious orgs and initiatives, not like disregarding the fact that they're religious, because simply the fact that they believe that they will actually help. So what do you get from government? Four paths to victories. Firstly is that you empower people to be more socially aware. You bring more awareness and action to this issue. And fourthly is that we legitimize. Thirdly is we legitimize religion, and lastly is that we help more people in need, which is the most important metric. Thank you. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Thanks for that speech, DPM. There was an observer who entered in the middle of your speech. So can I get consent from both teams if you guys are willing to be watched by observers?
We're G.
Okay, for Gov. Oh wait, that's Gov. For Op.
Hi, sure.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you. Diallo, you may begin.
Good. I've- hold on. Wrote out everything. I'll ask for POIs. So if you are not able to raise during the time that I ask a POI, then just don't raise anymore because I won't be taking you. So, okay, wait. I would assume I'm visible. Yes, I am. Just like ready, you guys. After before second discussion, so you can clearly like know when. Okay. The separation of the church and the state exists because there's a clear difference in roles, but also because religious institutions have biased inclinations to meet their goals, and that the state has a different form of paternalism. This introduction straightforwardly tells you that even if they gravitate more efforts onside government, such as reconciling progressive and conservative people, this is a question on proximity, not the scale of help you are able to provide. But also, that straightforward assertion, because the conflict on political principles seeps in much more on government when you combine both church and the state, further expansion later. To clarify the margin, three things. One, preaching to help your neighbor happens on both ends and is immaterial. The reason why people don't do it is because they are already exhausted by the very system. The help should no longer exist from a bottom-up approach, but from the societal change that ought to manifest and must be demanded from the state. But two, people's subscription and religious beliefs is simply asserted on government. If religion indeed survives based on their fans, then they should prove why they should stay instead of assume that they maintain the very same values and principles. But three, social repercussions, e.g. hypocrites or too fluid or adaptive, would exist on both ends because the society exists on both coins, so the extent of impact on DPM is useless. This house believes that X should Y is not an actor motion, by the way. It assesses whether the role of actor X should be that way in an objective lens. The debate's margin is not on giving social services, but rather the prioritization thereof. This means that faith-based organizations will still be utile during times of instability or natural disasters onside opposition. What happens on government is the active preaching that people should give money, tithes, resources, etc. has to be prioritized at the end of the day. One, this means that people are pressured to give more and more amounts of money, coupled by the active guilt trip mechanisms that these organizations already do impose. This looks like Iglesia ni Cristo for like forcing you to give tithes. Giving money is a much more likely case over putting active efforts to help because people's time is finite but much more nuanced that the subscribers of this, which is oftentimes the middle class to poor, source these organizations to simply get solace or peace easily, not to like probably have extra job at the end of the day. Therefore, the active action that Gov talks about is also a direct active disincentive to opt into religion and practice evangelization. The fact that in the status quo there exists less and less traction towards religion, to which we agree, because of the fact that it's no longer necessary to stay in churches for hours, but those also are not the like real marginal actors that exist because they would opt out on both ends when they feel as if religion is no longer utile, or the fact that they still have to put on extra extra efforts in order for their moral compasses to be fixed. Therefore, it's less likely for people to follow side government. But two, in the instance that there are active actions, there are four things under this as hinted from my introduction. One, you dilute the state's role to arbitrate how these projects go by. So likely people would be doing these things that are inclined or much more fulfilling on their own, and distorts which actions are much more validified are much more legitimized on their end. The tension enters because of the fact that most people who opt into religion are the majority of the population rhetoric as well, instead of the small number of vulnerable progressive people. So the cycling of resources where at best you're extremely efficient on-site government only ties back to specific people. This is intuitive and has been happening, e.g. the clan wars happening in BARM, where they fight for subscribers to maximize their financial benefits, or the fact that religion has intertwined politically and has pervaded the political interests of people. But two, there is a shifting of responsibilities that blurs the direction of call-out mechanisms. Since both people compete for the legitimization of their actions on-site government, the direction as to who's at fault becomes uncontested, because even religion has already actively tried invading these political spheres. The clear nuance lies on the people's power to contest this. The clicker is simple. It is to say that it's hard to call out religious institutions because their ways of providing services and evangelization is arbitrarily evaluated, so people cannot contest their interference on said government. This means that there's an active dictatorial contact as to how institutions ought to function, and a greater monopoly of power towards religious institutions that shifts away the power to a much more fairer institution. This means that the problems in status quo might be resolved temporarily on government, but it makes the problem less visceral. So there's simply less impetus for people to improve and question these institutions, to question the state at the end of the day. But lastly, the significance from LO remains unmoved because the uncontested frame is on the society's perceived purpose of religious institutions. Government has no framework about actively adopting, and that is precisely how I tie back the significance of my first speaker on the latter speeches. The second discussion therefore questions about why active adaptation, much so the prioritization, is very harmful. Before proceeding, go, Poem.
What is the benefit on your comparative?
So I think it's quite clear already as to how it's much more streamlined in calling out these institutions, but also because you are able to recognize the direct separation, and this is where I will destroy that POI. One, I think that active adaptation forces to sideline its other facilities, either ways like belief systems. So even if you do have the very benefit from said government, that is a very big opportunity cost that exists on their end. Albeit maybe these other facilities are not tangibly useful, but these are facilities that made people opt into religion much more. What happens is an active backsliding and disbelief due to the disproportionate efforts become much more emphasized because the church's optics and purpose become undefined. So if the tipping point from Gov is simply about scale, they should first prove why the opt-in is consistent instead of assuming the same amounts of fan bases and fans that op already maintains. Secondly, these social services being utile is now contingent on the purpose of salvation. This is much worse because the incentive for people to redefine the social narrative that enables much more elitist narratives become much more hardlined. What is the clear conclusion under this? One, the fulfillment of roles and all participation has a clearer goal for what purpose. It is not for your savior but as a means of your fundamental right, and that is the form of call-out mechanisms that is already raised as early as LO. What happens on Gov is that people like criminals and people who differ in religion and beliefs likely would not receive rehabilitative care because they feel as if helping criminals or those who oppose this form of religion is a fundamental contradiction to the social service they are providing. But secondly, on proximity, Gov fails because government never proved why these services should come from religion. As early as LO, we question the actor proximity, no engagements from DPM. That is a hasty reply towards the POI. Even if you receive extra help from side government, I ask on position, why is this extra help the most important contribution on the round? But B, because LO was never superficial, they don't know how to engage. This is the very last part of the speech, which is simply about self-fulfillment and why opt-ins is much more sustainable. This is where I'm going to ground the very question coming from GovWhip. This is the very clear positive material from LO. One, you lower the barrier to entry towards religion. People can still pay money, as we can see in the current status quo, on our end through tithes. The massive amount of people push that they still massively contribute either ways, even if they do not probably tangibly manifest all of those actions. But secondly, the margin is on them doing it voluntarily. This is extremely important because on position, this determines which followers is self-sustaining in nature and which follower needs help. The voluntary form that exists on-site opposition literally makes the problem much more visceral, that likely certain forms of religions is much more oppressive towards the general citizen. That's the main reason as to why we are able to call out and C, and likely say that the 10% constant like contribution about tithe system is extremely oppressive towards the general average person. This means that you create more vivid policies on-site opposition, at the same time prevent unnuanced discussions that oftentimes skewed, but that oftentimes skews these policies. But even worse, because there's now no direction as to who you should call out on-site government, because both the church and literally the state is now functioning all at the same time. All of those reasons, clear opposition.
Thank you. Calling on Governor.
Hello. Just give me a second. Also, it's good to see some of the other debaters in the Zoom. It's been a while since we've went against each other. Just to check, I'm like audible, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just give me a second. Okay. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. The most important consideration is the unique function of religion. It is hope. Under their comparative, this hope is stifled. It is the fact that social change and like things that they want to talk about under their comparative will likely be stifled. This is important because hope is the unifying mechanism that will bring both the old conservative people and the young liberals together. That is only when you will have any solid benefit in society. That is only when you are going to be able to help those who are the most disenfranchised in the first place. The first thing that I want to do is just respond extraneously to the case that you get coming from side opposition. They explain a few things. The first thing that they explain is about like religion and how it's the main, you're diluting the main purpose of like religion. I don't see why this matters. There's no clear benefit as to why you losing out on the ability to be religious is important. But even if we are to say that okay, maybe that is true, the problem is that there are exogenous reasons why you might still be religious in terms of Bible study. It's the fact that just because you're in a faith-based organization does not suddenly mean that religion is entirely changed. I think what is likely to happen on the comparative on our side is that you have a different lens to view religion. So this naturally means that the way by which people who are skeptical of religion or people who generally dislike religion, they will be able to understand that it actually does do good things. That's when less division and less hatred is likely to sow in the first place. The second thing that they explain at Stewie is just that you will change things. I don't understand how this happens. We specifically explain why you need to build capacity under our comparative, primarily because that is when you're going to be able to actually challenge these systems in the first place. Perhaps it's not directly, but you can help other NGOs to do this in the first place. Secondly, I want to discuss about the issues in this round and explain why we have to take this debate quite clearly. Firstly, the first issue that I want to discuss is on religion. What does opposition explain in this regard? They explain that you lose out on the real meaning of religion and that it's like and that it is just very superficial. But before I continue, go.
Hope is a new matter, but even if it's not, you have to prove why grassroots effort still is much more effective over the counterfactual about institutionalized efforts and streamlined call-outs on said opposition.
So I don't get how this happens, right? You never explain to me how these callouts will happen. Who will be doing the callouts? Is it social movements? Is it religious organizations? These things are very unclear. But even if you do assume that it's one of those two actors, the fact is that they don't pool their money. They don't collaborate. So the extent at which you can call these things out is vastly limited. And if this is a debate about the status quo, which technically it is on your comparative, because the way in which they evangelize is currently not through providing social welfare. They haven't even reformed these systems in the first place. So your benefit is still very speculative and it's quite unclear. But secondly, what I want to explain, or what is opposite explain in the regard about religion, they explain that you dilute the real meaning of religion and that it's superficial. Why is this untrue? The first reason on the meaning of religion, A, is that there are exogenous reasons as to why you would learn about religion. E.g., you will still be born in religious communities. Your parents might still be Christian, they might still be Muslim. You will still have Bible study, you will still have Sunday schools. The various other ways you can understand religion will still be present. Therefore, I'm not necessarily sure as to why the margin of change of understanding religion is specifically pertaining to these religious groups in the first place. But B, on it being superficial, likely it won't be superficial because the way in which people who understand religion in these organizations will be through the lens of social welfare and aid. And primarily, if they want to make the debate about who is able to better cater to religion and the purposes of religion, look at what religion tells us to do. It tells us to care for the disenfranchised. It tells us to dismantle oppressive systems that inherently have ruined the lives of poor people. The only way in which you're able to do do that is when you fundamentally have more capacity, which is exactly what we give you on our comparative. When you unite both the people who are conservative and liberal, who are older and younger, that is the only time you're able to create structural change. Under their comparative, it's quite speculative. But even if you don't believe any of these reasons, the primary call out that they are still susceptible to on-side opposition is that they just don't have any clear benefit. The only thing that they explain, and it's the only semblance of a benefit from their first argument, which they drop at deputy, is that maybe it is more accessible. The reason as to why this is not important is because accessibility of religion was never a problem in the first place. Religion is still, it is like widely seen, it's less palatable as it used to be back in the day, but accessibility to religion has never been a problem. You have had churches, you have had religious communities even outside of the groups. You have been born into these things. Acceptance into it is just being what's the word, being accessible into it was never an issue in the first place. I think the real margin or the real benefit that you get that makes the most sense in the round is where is religion going to be able to firstly be perceived better, which is clearly under our comparative, because it's actually when you have people on the ground, it's actually when you're going to be able to pass for policy, or at the very least, if you don't do that, maybe you will aid other groups and things of that nature. That's when people likely see religious groups better. But secondly, it's when you actually help the people. I already said that. All right. The second issue that I want to discuss, the second issue that I want to discuss is on change. And notably, this is the most salient clash because religion specifically tells us that change is important, that you have to help people. And this goes for a vast majority of religions. So if that is the implicit goal of religion, then therefore the team that is able to prove this the best is clearly the one that has the most interest, that is able to provide to the interests of the religious group in the first place. That's able to prove the incentives of the actor to do a certain thing. And what does opposition explain in regards to the clash about change? They explain that it's hard to question the state and call out institutions that are likely have pernicious incentives and will do horrible things to the marginalized groups in society. Why is this untrue? A. They don't explain how capacity is built on their comparative. Likely, we explain that if faith organizations collaborate with NGOs, you can do two things. Firstly, is that you can either financially aid these NGOs, which is a net positive in terms of actually passing policy. You give them a greater capacity to lobby for things. But B, it's that you endorse NGOs. And notably, an endorsement is quite good because that is when you get the vast majority of people, both conservative and liberal, to opt into you. That is when that's when social change is going to likely be far greater. But secondly, I want to discuss about the marginalized groups that we talk about in this debate because it's still a bit unclear. I will clarify it. I think it's people like queer individuals. I think it's people who or transgender individuals, who's actually also a queer individual. But these are people that are generally seen horribly by the sects of religion that they want to talk about on either comparative. The difference under our side is that you will destigmatize these people because you understand that they are societally disadvantaged. There are structural barriers that prevent them from living the life that everybody gets to live. And if you shift the barrier of religion being something that it actually should help these people, that religious organizations ought and have the principled obligation to help these people, that is when likely you're able to have more discussions about the role in like queer people in religion. Likely, this is when the discrimination of marginalized groups will be far better on our comparative. On their side, what will likely happen is that even if it is accessible, even if they believe on all of the claims that you get from them, the reality is the discrimination of these people will still be far worse. It is when people view these people as inherently sinful, as going to hell, the discrimination that they will feel will be utterly horrible. So therefore, we win on two metrics. The first is just on engagement. I think we engage pretty well. The second is that we're able to provide a much more robust case. We nuance our arguments to the actor, but secondly, we explain why there's a net good. So if it is that this house believes that motion, there's a net good, which is that you help more people on our comparative. For all these reasons, religion is probably a lot better on proposition.
Thank you, Whip. Calling on Ope. Here.
My partner will be sharing, I mean, teammate will be sharing the same device.
Okay. Hello. Hold on.
Okay, noted.
Okay. Let me just like set up like my paper because it's like very messy right now, all over the place. While I do that, hello. My name is Chate. Pronounce he him. I know it's a weird name. It's pronounced Chate. But anyways, pronounce he him again. POIs through chat, preferably Chate chat. Anyways, here preferably POIs. Here, please. There I said it there. All right. Um. Anyways, starting my speech. By the way, sorry if I might shop, especially to my to the people living in here. Sorry. Anyways, start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Love thy neighbor, we love religion. We agree with government bench, but if religious institutions want subscribers through pauperization or the process by which religious institutions capitalize on charity or social services to attract poor individuals to subscribe to their gospel, then best have that religion to die out for the reasons that we explain at Constructives. That this is where I clarify and call out that one, they're often coercive in nature. This means that they inherently take advantage of the vulnerability of these poor individuals simply because they are at the ends meet. They struggle to have full autonomy of their own, out of their own discern. This means that the moment that they subscribe to these religious institutions is often based on impulse or rather based on the last resort. They don't have an actual active choice because charity is now the prerequisite to be able to attract followers and what have you. But second, furthermore, sickening, this is something that's incredibly sickening as what we explained from our Constructives because you threaten poor individuals of not getting these charities if they do not subscribe. Sure, this is not explicit, but it's something that's inherently implied because they have the incentive structure to retain as many of their current subscribers are and reach to a far larger audience as government paints themselves from PM to whip. This means that the case from Niels is incredibly important. We clarify that these individuals often end up skewing the actual purpose of these religious institutions. They ought to spread the gospel about Jesus and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example. What Niels was able to clearly explain is that evangelism is something that gets diverted on side government. You do not let individuals actually fully commit to these religious institutions precisely because it comes at a condition that they need to meet. For example, that you ought to keep giving them sort of an exchange, like having to attain charity and money in exchange for your quote unquote loyalty. But lastly, this means therefore that pauperization only worked back then because of states being inherently incapacitated to be able to reach these marginalized individuals or communities, precisely coming from PM himself. What we explain, however, is that the state as of status quo is currently far more relatively capacitated to be able to fulfill their patriarchal obligation coming from Stewie to these marginal communities. But moreover, there are already existing certain social movements that fight for the minority, e.g. those who are pro-poor, those that arrange welfare programs. What we explained, this is why the question on the incentive structure, why it was necessary for them in the very first place, very important in the get-go. What we explain and point out from Niels is that simple, that why exactly is it the main incentive of religious institutions, I said through chat, I hope that gets respected more, to make use of charity when there already exists mechanisms and models to address these issues on the ground. At the end of this, you ought to weigh this primarily on how the messaging is something that's not only genuine, but something that's also far more accurate at the very end of the day. This metric is incredibly important in debate winning for the reasons that I'm about to explain. A. People often lose faith because of uncertainty, because their faith wavers at the mercy of feeling lost. This is precisely the flip on their side. But because the subscribers that they got on the side government relies on conditions to having to be fed, having to be provided for, they're more likely to waver when there comes times of inconsistency, as what we explained from Constructives. But B, this further looks like these religious institutions having to prioritize or focus on gaining as much sponsorships or donations to be able to sustain their capacity to keep providing social services, because let's face it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of resources such as people and materials, for example. This means that because you skew the responsibility or the focus of these religious institutions, you're far likely to stray away, or you're far more likely to stray away from your own incentive, which is to spread the gospel and fulfill the process of evangelism, which is the catharsis point of these religious institutions, something that's incredibly important. But see, if these religious institutions fail, and this is their worst case, they never engaged with this, you're likely going to collapse. You don't ensure structural integrity. These religious institutions will lose hope that government whip is looking for, because you're instill instability, for example, people will plummet into uncertainty. More and more people will opt out of these religious institutions because of reasons such as not being able to meet the conditions of being able to provide to your subscribers at the end of the day. But even if you don't believe all of this, what we explain is that if religious institutions want to gain subscribers, then much better to attract ones that are actually going to be committed to the gospel itself. This is important because we explained from Niels that that opting out is far likely going to happen within these institutions when they collapse, for example, in a get-go, when they're no longer able to sustain. This is why I disproved their analysis on why you get sponsorships. Don't worry, I will engage with all the cases that you've run. One, far as government themselves agrees with, oftentimes there are already progressive narratives that goes against the gospel that is being spread by religious institutions. This further gets exacerbated if you further go with a more coercive sort of nature of trying to attract your subscribers. This means that you're far likely going to have conflicting ideals. You generally have less and less support systems that they're talking about. There are less people who are willing to fund you beyond your own religious communities. But furthermore, and this is the flip, that they're unlikely to be able to be capacitated to sustain precisely because there's resources is something that's so scarce. This means that even fighting the best case scenario government that you get so many subscribers, the cost of living, or rather the cost of maintaining the amount of subscribers is what's going to kill their case on the foot, precisely because of things like what we talked about, like on constructives, that because they have a conditionality to fulfill, e.g. having to continuously provide for these subscribers. Thirdly, the exploitative nature of pauperization is much more likely to happen, as Dewey explains. You're more likely to exploit the idea that, oh, you will be forgiven by God if you contribute to this charity because of having to forego evangelism and forwarding the gospel. This is incredibly alarming for its manipulative nature, but not only that, it's something that's incredibly going to dilute the nature of having to stick to your genuine sort of like actual process of having to like forego these sort of like religious gospels at the very end of the day. Fourthly, I genuinely do not understand why government really wants to unite the conservative and the progressive. Like guys, they're literally differing political blocks that have literally misaligned incentives. This is not the priority as what we explained from constructives. The priority is to be able to sustain within your own community. For example, this is where Stewie's contribution is something that's far more clear. Clan wars are incredibly prominent for the same reasons as having differing incentives, that you often do not put a barrier against these sort of like individuals when you kind of like prioritize to unite them or whatnot. But fifthly and lastly, this is right away. Even if you don't believe all of this, the weighing then is clear that because you dilute your navigation or the path that you're going through as a religious institution, you're far likely to lose the direction in your own faith, which overall kills both benefits government wants to run on spreading love and keeping your own community. The next thing we want to do is crystallize the win on our side via our counterfactual. What we explained from Niels is simple, that instead of you forcing individuals to subscribe by those sort of like methods, which by the way is the main reason why palatability of religious institutions has declined as of status quo, because individuals often feel coerced and fear-mongering is incredibly oppressive to the average individual. What Niels and Stevie was able to prove is simple. One, the counterfactual is sticking to status quo, that you leave these religious institutions to focus on spreading the gospel via missionaries or maybe even seminars. But we explain that these are far better insofar as you do not coerce individuals to taking advantage of their vulnerability or their socioeconomic status. But second, you're far better to have committed subscribers precisely because you go through community-based discussions and conversions, something that genuinely relates or tries to touch the hearts of the livelihood of these individuals. It is in the fact that they are actively rationalizing their decision whether or not they will subscribe. This means that uncertainty, because you remove the barrier of conditionality that these people need to meet, e.g. charity or social services, you're far likely to sustain these subscribers because you leave the individuals to exercise their own reasoning and autonomy to choose and subscribe. Thirdly and lastly, if government whip is looking for capacity, then it's simple. That precisely because
Time.
NGOs are
Wrap
still
up.
currently existing, the political actors often subsidize these sort of religious institutions, so you're far more sustainable, you're far more secure. All those reasons clearly up.
Thank you, Opwip. Just a reminder, please do mind your time. I will no longer be crediting anything beyond the time anyways. Thank you for that speech. Calling on Op reply to finish the case for opposition.
Hi, give me a few seconds.
Op reply.
Hi, yeah. I won't open cam anymore because I love so sabog. Uniting people and government is much more speculative for the reason that we've discussed how there are already much more conflicting principles that clash against each other, even religiously. These religious institutions are not monolithic in nature. That's why the lack of engagement about the existence of clan wars, both infighting and external fighting, already proves a clear deadlock and a lack of engagement coming from said government. This means that even if at best you are able to unite people politically, you still divide them religiously on their end. So the solvency that you are able to get on said government only transcend to a new problem. The question therefore is on the ability for these individuals to call out. This is why opposition becomes successful in the round, because we've proven why regulating and calling out religion becomes much more punitive, because it's also not their obligation to do so, but also because the people are less likely going to question the very teaching that is less likely going to be casted in a sufficient amount of doubt. That is the main reason as to why the call-outs coming from side opposition becomes much more effective, for the very reason that there are already certain incentives that happens right now, such as the active collaborations within NGOs and much more efforts that are mentioned as early as LO. You have to note that it's much more far-fetched to believe the government's form of more regulated actions and peaceful actions, because honestly, they only assumed full benevolence towards religion because that's in the writing, asserted, and the shadow of doubt is very clear from DLO to WHIP, because even religion does those crazy things, such as talking about irredeemable sins, e.g. you should not forgive that certain person who killed, and justifying the murder of people who simply do not believe on God, so atheist probably is now dead or do not receive the very supplies that side government want to give towards the people. So this is not simply about questioning marginalized people, which is a very myopic response from government whip. This is about the dispossessed people that are ostracized based on the religious beliefs that exist. Hence, the explicit example about non-believers, by extent, government whip cannot impact it on queer, because DPM says that people who opt into this are not the youth and implicitly attainably the queer. So the cycle of benefits actively isolates queer people directly away from the cycle of benefit that you get on said government. I think both on proximity and vulnerability, they fall 7 feet below. I'll be extremely charitable against said government. Two things I'll directly weigh, and let's entertain that the clash is indeed about positive material, to which they've never even proven as to why the negative material that exists on their end is something that's resolved, or at least much less, has less margin at the end of the day. One, on the utility of religion, three things under this. Government says it's about helping people directly. One, I want to note that this is something that's nuanced, because the way at which we are still able to help, e.g. the giving of tithes still does exist on our end voluntarily, because we already have the massive fan base that we're able to prove is likely going to continuously exist on our end when you prevent the shift happening. But two, because people still help by the fact that they can still give things such as tithes without the increased cost, but also because they never prove why the extent of margin you get on government is extremely proximate in the round. But three, because allowing people to rest and gain fulfillment is also a type of benefit. But two, on the net benefit case that Gov kept repeating, even if it's clear. One, their only question is about capacity. Weird, because no, we've already told you that capacity does not have to exist through active grassroots efforts anymore, because oftentimes it is ineffective. That's why you need an active collaboration of these NGOs, or the fact that the people should have a clearer direction on call-outs. No, we do not have to prove why more people would question. It's already directly mentioned as early as the first minute that the question is not on the scale of helping people but on proximity. This is not a matter of separation, because if we're talking about selective call-outs based on political views, then even on their end, their actions are also isolated and exist on echo chambers based on religious views. But two, this is also about sustaining the very people and the current individuals you have right now if we're indeed talking about capacity. This is not about whether or not the religious teachings are right now, but whether or not the people would follow along the shift that you are currently doing. The problem why they assert that religion has no problem on opt-in in the current status quo is because religion currently on status quo are majorly non-oppressive and is not seen as a chore, but it's a voluntary form of action that gives people the exact amount of probably self-fulfillment or probably solace that exists on-side opposition. This means that the opt-in on-side opposition is much more exclusive, and even if we do not do all of those things that they mentioned, at least we are still able to contribute passively. All those reasons, opposition.
Thank you, opposition reply. To finish the debate and finish the case coming for government, calling on co-reply. You're here.
Panel, I think that this debate is really about two questions. Number one, where is social change better? And number two, where is religion better? Firstly, on why social change is better, we think this is the most important question because it helps the most people. It is the most urgent because people are suffering and in need of help right now, and it's the most important because it's the most vulnerable actor. So what does opposition say? Opposition has no positive case. We tell you that because of that, they immediately lose this clash because at best, they simply say that, we get the call. They call out instincts. They say that on our side of the house that social change is fake, that it's superficial. We tell you that even so, we still at the very least get to help people. Coming from government, we prove to you two things. First, that we get much more support as a result of the religious being large institutions, that we get more millions of supporters to fund and to give their labor to it. But the second is that we help marginalized groups and who are the most important actors because they need the help most right now. The second main clash, where they actually have substantive, is where is religion better? The first reason that they give is that the meaning is diluted on their side, that they get more faithful and sustained religion. Our response is simply, why does this matter? We simply say that it does they give no specific impacts as to why having more faithful people actually helps compared to our side, where we say that we get far more trust and more people in support, but also that in status quo that but also they do not respond to our point that in status quo religion is currently like diminishing in its like potency. Like a lot of young people specifically now think of religion as being hypocritical. They don't see that, oh, it's been that it's they don't see like the value of religion anymore. And this is a problem notably we get from PM, and they still have not responded. What else have they said? They tell you that firstly that it's more accessible to people. We tell you that this is not true because it's accessible in either way. That like religious orgs aren't the only way to view religion because there's so many other religions. But secondly, that they say that poor people don't feel a need to opt into religion to get social welfare. No, believe that this is never our case because you just give random disenfranchised people the financial aid when there's not really a condition to decide your economic status. I just want to weigh like both sides on this clash because it's the most direct. We tell you that would you rather vote for a panel? Firstly, on where more on their side where you have more fanatical, more secluded and sheltered religious people who are stronger in their beliefs, versus on our side where we get, or even if we take their best case, that we get less hardline or faithful people, that we get more people, and that these people not only like are able to act more and do some more stuff for the marginalized communities. We think that we win on this issue simply. I want to compare, before I move on to why opposition necessarily loses, I want to talk about a comparison of their worlds. Because on their side, they live in status quo where religion, where the main priority for religion is evangelization, and that insofar it is simply telling people, hey, you need to believe in God, you should read the Bible. Compared to our side, our world, where people are more inclined to help the join these and subscribe to these religions because they actually help people, because we actually are able to give support to the people who need it more, and notably we're able to get support and funding. Because of this, we won these two issues. Why did opposition lose then? We tell you that they, for one simple reason, that they do not have a benefit and a positive case. We tell that we are unsure as to what are the specific impacts that you should credit from opposition, because the benefits from our side are clear, that we simply help people, and more people get to communicate more and be part of this larger community that isn't just secluded into these fanatical religious groups that that opposition really wants so much. So we win for simply that, simply that, number one, we get more social change, and number two, we are more united. Because this, very proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Gov. Reply. That formally ends the debate. You may now cross-share the House. Just a reminder that this is a silent round, so I will not be giving away an OA. I will not be giving any comments, but you can just PM me through Discord, or if you know my Facebook